we had looked at before and just ran away as fast as we could. And that was only because we said the window is now. We got to do this now. Now's the time. We sell the apartment also. We got to move on. So I went back again and I looked at the house with a flashlight and a measuring stick and a lot of swear words. And went through by room, clearing away bottles and old decayed cobwebs and old kitchen doors and whatnot. I was sort of counted to 10 and just ran in and started measuring. And by the time I was done, I was severely depressed. This is impossible. So then I went back to a friend's house and I spent the night there turning around. And about 4 o'clock in the morning, I had a flash and I saw the whole place with its potential. Pretty darn close today. I had made some imaginary missteps. I thought that this stuff out there was 2 stories and so on. But by and large, I ended up with a vision of how this place could be, and I called Han in the morning, and they said, it's just terrible. It's just absolutely horrible, but it has great potential. Now, it had decayed for 30 years, and probably another 30 years before that, because somebody who was quite incapable of really taking care of himself had lived here for that period of time. So 60 years of decay. And by the time we bought it, there were major beams and the walls. No floors, no windows, no doors. My brother was here that fall and shook his head together with my father. Agreed that the great potential was there. But that's what it was, great potential.
White elephant.
White dying elephant. But now, one of the reasons I think that this house has the feeling that it has is that it's quite old. And of course, we try to respect that. And like you say, it's very old, it's also very modern. And that building, and actually the wall you see there and the wall you see here are the 2 first buildings on the place. And these 2 walls have been built 300 years later to tie these 2 houses together. You can see there's no weaving brickwork in the corners. Just cut right into the old glass. So this one horse barn was from the 18th century, and this one from the latter part of the 15th century probably. I deduce that because our friends Jeremy and Anne lives in a house similarly old and built some strategies for the building structure that seems to be similar, size of the beams and bigger stones below and smaller stones above.
You do realize that it's about to fall down, don't you?
Yes. Where is it fall down? I'll help you, I have some experience. So if you look over here, there's big stones protruding into the living room. And so does it over there, but I've hidden it behind the staircase. So these are outsides of the old houses. And the beams in the kitchen and so on is probably from that time. And at that time, there was no other houses around here. This was in the middle of Bois d'Anjou. The great forest across the fields here has been owned by the Renaissance prince, René d'Anjou, who brought the Renaissance to France, and this was his hunting forest. It stretches quite far in both directions, and it's not just 2 kilometers deep, but a long thing. So at the time, this house was surrounded by a forest. No fields, no other farms. None of the ones you can see up this way or down that way was built at that time. They're much, much newer. They're from slightly before the French Revolution. So, and in that revolution, many of the buildings around here was destroyed and burned down because they were royalists out here in this area, in Vendée, which is further west. And again, in the war of the Second World War, the resistance was very powerful around here, and a lot of people were killed. So in many farms here, men had to administer to several women to get the population and farms populated. I'm not sure that's a pleasurable thing, but you still see today very many people in this region, not very many, but you see them often enough that you think, wow, here's the result of this damage that we do to and finally population. or practical population, actually. It was never more practical than it was in other places where war has been devastating. Anyway, the forest was surrounding this place, and we kind of supposed that the right in front of where my car is parked, there is a well.
Oh, yeah.
And it's 4 meters deep with water. And it's 5 meters down to the bottom of the property. So why isn't the water leaking out of that and down to the lower part? Why is it standing 4 meters higher than something that's much lower, 10 meters away? So we think that perhaps the house was built because it was a spring here. There's a spring somehow in that well. It's stone set and quite old, probably from the beginning of the house. We haven't checked the purity of that water yet, but we will do, and we will certainly use it for planting. So one can imagine that there's 2 buildings in the middle of a forest. It wasn't a farm, or if it was a farm, it was probably a farm that was, because of the standard of the houses, nobody ever lived here and was very rich before that. And the 2 buildings, being of this kind of primitive, basic nature, must have been perhaps a coach place to stop and feed the horses and so on for the road that went through this forest. And perhaps eventually it was turned into farming a little bit and so on, but it might have been even a squatter's place. That means some who occupied the land. And if that was in a huge, big forest, it could have occurred, it could have happened, without anybody really noticing. We don't know how old the roads are. The church archives in our cities in East Officials was destroyed in the Second World War by bombs, so there is very little evidence we have to go back and check this out. There are some relatives living around who was related to the person who lived here the last time. I'm saying all this. Well, yes, I'm trying to create for you a picture of how some squatters or some really basic people collected and put all these stones on top of each other, which is an incredible job. And it was taking patience and long time, and with some hopes that this was going to be something valuable to them. So you can see now we're trying to take care of these stones by not covering it up or just putting masonry on top of it, but to keep the stones. So you're always reminded of the immense labor that is in the foundations and in all the stones throughout the whole property. Little by little, time changes. Farms come, bigger farms, and this becomes a poor place and falls into decay. And as a ruin lover, this ends up being a canvas for creating something. And if the house had been less destroyed than it was, the potential would have been less. So the fact that it was so bare made it possible to use imagination and try to revitalize it so that we have come to call it Maison Phoenix, the house phoenix that has arisen from its ashes. And I like to think ethically, and I like to think that we can infuse this place with mythology and the kind of imagery that may be on the line of what you were saying about creating a place for something to happen. And something remarkable has already happened. Oh, yeah. All of you have come from far away to this little spot in this place in France. No doubt because, not just because of me, because I've sent you pictures of this place for years. You're all very curious, and you're all very fond of me, I suppose, otherwise you wouldn't be here. And so those two things together have brought you here, and that in itself is a fantastic event. And I praise you all, and I thank you all for coming, and it means really a lot to me that you have made this journey, and because we have prepared a place where this could actually happen. Although we had no plans of such a great event before last year, when only decided that we should have a 7-year faith party later on. So with that, I hope you have some little base that you can imagine future and past. And I will sit down and not bother you anymore, except to introduce whoever wants to speak next. And please don't wait too long, because we're all